Greetings and welcome to the Civil Rights, Utilities, Economic Development, and Arts Committee. It is April 24th and 9:36 a.m. I'm Lisa Herbold. I'm the chair of the committee. I'm the council member representing District 1 in West Seattle and South Park as well. So for today's, committee meeting, we will start off as we do once a month with our cultural spotlight, and we'll move into public comment. And then for the items of business for the day, we have a Race and Social Justice Initiative report for the Office of Economic Development and Film and Music, and then a Race and Social Justice report for Seattle Public Utilities. And then we're going to get a briefing from Nature's Scorecard, and be joined by folks from the Washington Environmental Council to hear about their rating of Seattle and other cities on a series of environmental issues. So with that, just move right into Cultural Spotlight. And Jenny, thank you so much.
Good morning. My name is Jenny. I'm with the Office of Arts and Culture, and this morning we're joined by Simone Navarre.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Simone Navarre. I'm a writer, playwright, actor, and performance artist. I started out as an actor, and somewhere along the line, I began to get disheartened with the kinds of roles that as a Black woman I was getting confined to. Roles that were not allowing me to articulate a full range of expression, what we would generally call stereotypes. I realized that if I was longing for something different, then I shouldn't wait for things to change, but I should be the change that I wanted to see. So I decided to go back to school and study writing so that I could begin to write more expansive roles for myself and for others and affect change on a more fundamental level. Since that time, I've worked to create plays and stories that break from stereotypes and offer a more expanded worldview for all of us. Today, I'd like to talk about a play that I've written, and it's called Don't Call It a Riot, and it's opening on May 11th in Seattle. This is a story that's very important to me, and it's very close to my heart. As a Seattle native, born and raised, one thing I began to notice were the lack of stories and plays that were set in the Pacific Northwest. I've always also admired activists and people who sacrifice their lives for the betterment of society. So those two things, wanting to write about this area and to write about activists, resulted in this play, which takes place in two historical periods in Seattle history. The first time period is the summer of 1968, soon after the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr. Aaron Dixon and Curtis Harris, founders of the Seattle chapter of the Black Panther Party, were arrested after the Panther headquarters were raided early morning, and the police came out holding a typewriter, claiming it was stolen property. That arrest set off 3 days of protest. The second time period is November 1999, on the eve of the WTO protests, sometimes known as the Battle in Seattle. Some 50,000 people showed up in the streets of Seattle to protest and shut down the World Trade Organization talks. And this resulted in several days of chaos in downtown as well as on Capitol Hill. Although the backdrop of this play is set in historical reality, all 5 of the characters are fictional. Each one is an activist, and each one's path takes very different turns. I sought to create characters that were not stereotypes of activists, which are either usually presented like cardboard cutouts or they're relegated to iconic images on a poster. I wanted to show them as flesh and blood, people who eat and get married and have children and experience joy and sadness and are victorious and vulnerable in all the ways that all humans are. I will end with a quote from the play. This is said by the character of Reed, who starts out in the Black Panther Party in '68. She leaves Seattle and she comes back 31 years later to participate in the WTO protest. Upon her return, she says, "Isn't it strange how a geographical area can hold your feelings? You can be away for decades, but when you go back, there it is. What you felt, how you thought, what you ate, how the smell of the cherry blossoms used to permeate the whole CD in the springtime. It's like nothing is truly gone. It just lies in wait until someone comes along and starts remembering again." Thank you.
Thank you. It starts remembering again because of another similar occurrence that causes that remembrance. This is really timely, this work of yours, considering that we are going to be honoring the 50th anniversary of the Black Panthers here in Seattle soon.
Right.
So it's really great. And as somebody who was here at City Hall working to negotiate arrangements between protesters and police on what their interactions would look like throughout the WTO, I can't tell you how many times I have tried to remind people that the WTO was a successful political action that resulted in changes to actual trade agreements on the ground because of what was happening. It wasn't just a riot.
Right,
So,
right.
The title really speaks to me. I was just a wee child in 1968, but somebody who can relate to the frustrations with those events, those important events of the day, being boiled down to simply a riot. I can only imagine what it must have been like in '68 to hear people characterizing the protests in the wake of the assassination of Dr. King as a riot. So great, I'm looking forward to checking this out. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
All right, with that, do we have any public comment today? All right, I think this is a first. No public testimony. All right, then with that, we'll move right into the RSJI Race and Social Justice report for 2017 from the Office of Economic Development and the Office of Film and Music. Greetings. There. Morning. Thank you all for joining us. If we could start with a round of introductions, that would be great.
Hello, my name is David Harris. I'm the startup advocate for the Office of Economic Development.
Good morning, I'm Jennifer Tam, the restaurant advocate at the Office of Economic Development.
Good morning, Amanda Allen, Finance and Operations Director for OED.
Good morning, Councilmember. I'm Kate Becker. I'm the Director of the Office of Film and Music.
Good morning, Mikhail Davila, Business Districts Advocate with OED.
Great. So how would we like to start off?
Well, I can get us kicked off, and I just want to thank you for having us, and we're excited to report out to you and the committee on our 2017 Race and Social Justice Work Plan. Because the Office of Economic Development also houses within it OFM, we're here together. And just as by way of background, OED's mission is to create a robust economy that's broadly shared, meaning that anybody can live. Our goal is to create an environment where anybody could live and work here in Seattle. And we do that by creating programs that reach out to businesses, business owners. We also focus on career-connected pathways, so developing our workforce, connecting low-income, low-skill individuals to opportunities to build their skills and engage in not just any old job, but a job that's going to bring them into a career pathway. So, and then we also have a focus on supporting specific business industry sectors, of which OFM definitely highlights our interest in the world of film and music. So I'll turn it over to Kate.
Well, thank you, Amanda. So the mission of the Office of Film and Music is to support and equitably grow the creative economy with a focus on film, nightlife, and special events. This mic seems awfully loud, so I'm backing up. We do this in a variety of ways, including our work with the Music Commission, as well as working directly with industry to really identify what the challenges are and troubleshoot and try to help problem solve them. Within all of our work, we make our decisions using a racial equity lens. Some of the very best RSJ work that we do is with our Music Commission, which we are presenting to you on that on May 8th. So that is not included within this report. We have a very strong change team in OED and OFM, and Amanda especially, make sure that we are constantly abreast of issues that are arising and bringing them to our attention and convening us endlessly to have deep conversation about them.
So I just want to say a couple of things. Obviously, you have a copy of the report, and that provides many details on all different types of work that OED does. And we wanted to bring to you a couple kind of nuggets of what it is that we do, just to kind of exemplify our work. And for that, Jen and David and Mikkel are going to share a little bit about their program area. Before we get into that, I just wanted to share a sample of how broadly OED is looking at race and social justice, and our use of WIMBYs, women and minority-owned business enterprises, is a sampling, gives you that sampling. We had a goal of 20% expenditure of our discretionary funds with WIMBYs, and we ended up spending a little over 50% of our discretionary budget with WIMBYs.
And when you refer to your discretionary budget, you're generally referring to opportunities to contract out for
Exactly.
For analytical work. What's a sort of a sampling of
Sure.
community engagement? What sort of things would your WIMBYs that you would contract out with do?
Those are all great examples. Most of OED's budget, I would say, is dedicated to staffing, and so obviously that's not available. But anytime that we can contract out for consultant work, to do any kind of research, and also to contract out with community to do any sort of project. That being said, a lot of OED's spend is made with community-based organizations that are nonprofits, and nonprofits are not eligible to be, although they may be serving communities of color and marginalized communities, they're not eligible to be considered under a WIMBY status. So we have a lot of money that goes to community-based organizations that perhaps we might argue, I guess, skews our stats toward WIMBY spending.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So I just wanted to share that, and then David's going to share about some of his work.
Yes. In late 2017, we launched the first draft of the Racial Equity Toolkit for what's now known as the Future Founders Fellowship. And we had the following questions in mind. First, how might we increase participation of marginalized populations in the innovation economy, and increase wages and employable skills for young people in neighborhoods with high risk of displacement? And also, how might we increase participants' knowledge of design, leadership, and development of local innovation ecosystems? And those questions were important because we know that in particular neighborhoods in Seattle, there are neighborhoods that have low access to opportunity and high risk of displacement, and that disproportionately affects marginalized communities. At the same time, we have a lot of local Seattle companies that are sourcing their talent from elsewhere. And we think that the pathways to these opportunities for economic mobility could be better curated. So the impact that we expect to have, we kind of witnessed through this process of creating, going through the process of the Racial Equity Toolkit. We actually started a year prior to launching that RET in collaboration with the Office of Film and Music. And that original question we started with was, how might we expose neighborhoods to Seattle's increasingly active virtual reality industry? We collaborated with Department of Neighborhoods, University of Washington's Co-Motion Labs and the Washington Technology Industry Association on a pilot pop-up VR event in May of 2017 at New Holly Gathering Hall. There were about over 140 people that attended, and we also work with the community liaisons to translate flyers in Amharic and Vietnamese. And there were hands-on demos, workshops, and access to information about training. But after debriefing with the community liaisons, we realized that there wasn't a sampling of the racial demographic that is in that neighborhood in South Seattle that was present at the event. And they kind of expressed us that the event was, while it was fun, it might not have been relevant to the priorities of the communities that we were targeting. So with that, we held further community discussions with local employers, community organizations, and education providers, and eventually ended up launching this fellowship called Future Founders Fellowship that will comprise training, tech training, as well as networking opportunities and an internship. And during the internship, participants will actually produce a VR product that serves community organizations in the Rainier Beach area.
So it sounds like what you learned from the pop-up is that you needed to shift towards a model that was more about mentoring and maybe providing some resources. I think you referred to it as an internship, so I don't know if you're providing some resources to get folks involved.
Definitely.
And it sounds like you were talking to South End employers and educators to talk about how to get the folks that either work for those employers or go to those educational opportunities to get them engaged, rather than hoping by having something at New Holly, the folks from the neighborhood would be coming. Is that generally?
That's generally correct. And most of the virtual reality activity in companies and education happens downtown. So we're looking at having some of those opportunities in South Seattle, but not just on an event basis, but a more direct opportunity.
Yeah. Fantastic. Thank you. That's great.
All right, thanks. All right. Okay, so for the Restaurant Success Program, as you know, it launched in 2014 with a one-stop shop online guide. And part of the program is to make sure that this information is accessible to all people. Not everyone accesses information online. So part of that, in 2017, we launched, well, we didn't launch it actually, we've been doing this since 2015, but in 2017, we did 5 different restaurant success orientations, and what those are essentially classes that go over all the nitty-gritty details of permits and licenses when you're opening or expanding a restaurant or a mobile food business or a catering business. And we partner with the Seattle Public Libraries, and part of that is because the Seattle Public Library locations provide a neutral location for people. And so we strategically have the workshops at the Central Branch, which is downtown, and then Delridge and the Douglas Truth, and then also worked with the SBA and SCORE to provide workshops there as well. And an average of, say, 9 to 10 businesses would show up for each workshop. And so this actually provided a really great opportunity for one-on-one and providing that face-to-face opportunity to answer questions for people that might not access this information online. And so that was one piece of it. The second piece is we launched a restaurant success media campaign in 2017. This was, again, to help make restaurant success information more accessible. And so we launched, this actually launched in 2018. We organized it in 2017. So it's actually launching right now. And we chose 10 different ethnic media 10 ethnic media channels to do this with a variety of digital, print, and radio ads. And it was translated into Spanish, Amharic, Vietnamese, and Chinese. So this was an effort to reach communities that might not see it online, might not be able to make it to workshops, or feel comfortable yet talking in person. So we made sure that the info was accessible through all different types of media. So we're actually still collecting data right now on how that has reached different folks. But so far we've had over thousands of impressions among the different media campaigns, and then at least, I would say, 100 clicks within the last 4 months. So that's been an effort for us to do that, and we'll continue doing that in 2018, the orientations.
Very interesting. Both of these examples, I think it really illustrates what is so useful to our work in public policy of using a racial equity toolkit is it creates a path and points us in the right direction for how we can improve our practices. And you're both giving examples in sort of how in real time the outcome of the RET has pointed you to try new strategies. So it's very great.
Thanks.
One final example. Good morning again, council member. I'm going to share information about the Racial Equity and Inclusion in Business Districts training as part of the Only in Seattle initiative, our Business Districts program. So prior to starting the first iteration of the training in 2015, we invited feedback and consultation from our business district partners to help us craft a service to improve inclusive outreach and community engagement in business districts. The feedback we received led us to offer a service through our Only in Seattle grant application where business districts could request and receive services for outreach and engagement to people of color and immigrant-owned businesses through Department of Neighborhood's Community Liaison Program. Business districts that applied for and received this support were invited to participate in a racial equity training that focused on key concepts such as relationship building with racially diverse businesses, racial implicit bias, systemic and institutionalized racism, and individual and organizational ally actions. The training emphasizes practicing tools and strategies learned to transform policies, behavior, and practices with a racial equity focus. In the most recent racial equity training, our goals were to ground district managers and community liaisons in racial equity and inclusive outreach principles and begin to build relationships. Conducting this training at the beginning of the year helped to build racial equity principles into program design. The ultimate goal is to improve access and services to people of color and immigrant-owned businesses and include them in district-wide decision-making. So just a few results from our most recent training. We had 18 participants from districts throughout Seattle. 90% agree that this training has increased their awareness of racial implicit bias and systemic racism. 40% describe their skill level as proficient after the training as compared to 10% prior to. 90% say they practice the tools and strategies learned either weekly or daily, and 100% are likely to recommend the training. Just a couple excerpts I had from participants and our district managers. One individual said, "Having come into these trainings with an already high awareness, this program increased my depth of perspective and has pushed me to ask new questions of myself and others." Another one said, "I have consistently thought about who wasn't at the table and how to include them in community decision-making." And finally, "Love that so many of the components, down to food and prizes, were embedded in anti-racism and small business. This is the level of anti-racism I aspire to." So in 2017, we served 62 businesses through our community liaison outreach support in business districts, and in 2018, we're working in 5 additional districts to do the same. As we reflect, we learned a lot in the 4 years of this racial equity training, as well as community liaison outreach, with over 60 of our business district partners from various districts in Seattle. We've learned that intentional community building with POC and immigrant-owned businesses is foundational to achieving racial equity outcomes. And we've also learned while inclusive outreach and community engagement is important and resources should be allocated to that work, it's quite different from racial equity work, where communities of color are centered and play a key role in decision-making. So as we sit in this space with our district partners, we continue to learn and grow together, identify our blind spots, and slow down to help build racial equity practices and policies. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd be really interested to receive the data that was collected across the business districts as it relates to race and gender of business owners. If that's something that's available, I think it would be very useful for myself as well as other council members to learn more about the business districts in the districts that they represent. Also, I note that we say that in 2017 the goals were to work with community liaisons in 7 business districts, and you were able to do so in 3, and 2 of the remaining 4, that was the goal, did not have the capacity or resources to execute the project. Is that something that the city was able to assist with, or is that something that they self-identified that they needed additional resources? And then, is there a way so that you as a department can still meet your goals, that could be identified on the front end, and you then could pivot towards maybe working with business districts that are ready to go, so that you can meet your yearly goals, and in the interim, the resources could be given to assist the districts that aren't ready to go for the next year?
Yeah, really good analysis there. I think that's one thing that we're finding out, that the districts kind of self-identify that their capacity is sometimes an issue to work on these really hands-on kind of projects, working with community liaisons and outreaching to some of these business owners that we've traditionally found don't come to meetings, right? You need to go to their door, you need to kind of speak their language and build that relationship, which takes time. So we're learning that, and one thing that we are learning is that business districts kind of, at least for this project specifically, can be in different stages of where they want to be. There might be an initial phase where they're just kind of collecting an inventory of really who are the POC and immigrant-owned businesses, where they might have a blind spot there before. Other districts that may know that want to go into a deeper level engagement and could be ready for, you know, a deeper level of work. So I think we're trying to tailor our program for additional years to kind of fit that same concern.
Great, thank you.
Thanks.
So hopefully you can see that my thoughtful colleagues really embrace the values of RSJI and implement them in all of our work that we do in an effort to really achieve racial equity and eliminate racial disparities in our city. In 2017, we made good progress, and you've heard about a bit of it, and we really are asking if we are serving everyone and looking for opportunities to pull in people of color, immigrant and refugee communities into the role of vendors as well as constituents. We apply an RSJI lens to all of the work we do, even if we're not doing an RET on a particular project. We have a much longer list of RETs that has been submitted to you, but we're just going to talk about 5 that we've identified for 2018. The first of which is our music ecosystem study, which I'm super excited about. And we are studying really what are the strengths and what are the opportunities in our music industry now. And the Racial Equity Toolkit will really guide our music economy study in a racially equitable manner, and also help us explore the root causes of racial disparities within our music industry. So that is on deck for this year, as well as a nightlife equity study. We know where all the main nightlife venues are, but we are wanting to know where all of our nightlife venues are and make sure that venues and places that are nightlife establishments that are not traditionally included in the scope of nightlife when we are talking about policy are included as we move forward.
Can you provide, not necessarily nightlife offers by name, but what are the types of venues that may not be traditionally considered part of nightlife that you have sort of intentionally decided to adjust the traditional thinking to include? What types of venues?
We're talking more about outlying neighborhood sorts of establishments that are not thought of as big nightlife places, but may serve very important neighborhood and community functions as gathering places for people. We're also evaluating hookah bars and how we want that to intersect with our nightlife work moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you.
You bet.
And I'll share with you a couple of OEDs, racial equity toolkits that we're planning to do this year. One is on the Byrd Bar Central Area property transfer up in looking at the building transfer from Fire Station 23, and we're working on that in concert with the Office of Planning and Community Development, as well as the Department of Finance and Administrative Services, and using a RET to look at the approach for that property transfer, highlighting any racial equity impacts that the process may have. This year, we received $100,000 of additional funding to support a contract with Ingersoll Gender Center from Council, and to help them build out the Trans Economic Empowerment Program, to work with transgender community on workforce development, making connections with employers and preparing them, transgender folks, to enter the workforce. So we'll do a RET on that program development.
Could you talk just a little bit more about the Byrd Bar property transfer and sort of the sequencing of the work that OED is doing as it relates specifically to the RET, along with the other steps that are necessary for the property transfer? There's a huge amount of interest in the community about this property transfer, and it would be helpful to understand your anticipated timeline for the RET, and again, how that step is sequenced with the other steps that are going to be necessary for the transfer.
Right, there are a lot of steps, so that's a really good question. And a lot of the steps actually lie with our counterparts at the Office of or FAS. And I think at this point we've just been really thinking about it as a high-level RET to really show racial equity outcomes in a successful transfer. We did some work last year with not only Fire Station 23 and Byrd Bar, but 2 other central area properties. And there was strong kind of community engagement in that process for community ownership of those city-owned buildings. So I think right now it's just at the stage that we're in, which is, FAS is really yet to engage in kind of the transfer process to really start the RET process there and understand those racial equity impacts.
So I think maybe to clarify my own question for myself, what I'm asking is, are you guys authorized to begin the RET, or do you need to wait for FAS to complete some tasks before you start that?
I don't, so approaching a RET can happen at any point in a process. So I don't see that we need to wait for them to be finished with their process in order for us to start considering what the impacts are and to start laying the groundwork. A lot of the racial equity toolkit questions are helping you to identify what the potential impacts of the program or policy it is that you're developing, helping you to really identify the population. So really focusing in on who is here wherever I'm delivering this program or policy. And so there's I would say the first 3 of, I think 5 or 6 questions are really focused in background, and that we definitely can get started on. Obviously, the final questions have to do with your decision making and your policy, and so that would require FAS's work to be completed.
Okay, very helpful. Thank you.
And then the last one that I just wanted to share with you is one that actually Jen will be working on with some other folks in our office related to lease education, where we're hosting a series of educational workshops focused on small business owners in Chinatown ID to help them prepare for future development, and also how to best negotiate their leases so that they receive some benefit. So we'll do a RET to cover the planning and implementation of that effort. And that's just a sample of what we're up to this year. There's more to come, and we'll look forward to reporting back this time next year.
Really appreciate it. There's a lot that we didn't cover in this overview. So to me, that's just really good evidence that you are doing a lot of deep work around racial equity, and I want to thank you all for coming and sharing that with members of the public who are tuning in. All right, and myself. Thanks.
Thank you.
Councilmember.
Second item on today's agenda is Seattle Public Utilities 2017 Race and Social Justice Report.
Chairs? Got some fantastic. Spread out. We've got missing council members today. We can take all the room we need. Greetings. Start with introductions, please.
I'm Mami Hara with Seattle Public Utilities.
Natalie Hunter, Change Team Co-Chair.
Tracy Rowland, Change Team Co-Chair.
Katia Garcia, the WIMBY Manager.
Thank you.
Mattia Earhart with Environmental Justice and Service Equity Division.
Steve Hamai, also with the Environmental Justice and Service Equity Division. Lee Moman, co-BT member, as well as Operations Manager for the North Transfer Station.
Richard Fernandez, I'm with the Project Delivery and Engineering Branch.
Deb Hayden, I'm with Drainage and Wastewater. I'm on the Branch Equity Team and Change Team.
Yep. Great.
I would like to start, yes.
Off? Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting Seattle Public Utilities to discuss our 2017 Race and Social Justice Initiative work. As you can tell, we're excited to be here. SPU has a vision of being a community-centered utility that provides the highest possible value to everyone we serve. And in keeping with that vision, our RSJI work focuses upon the needs of those we serve to ensure equity and inclusion in all we do. Seattle Public Utilities has a deep commitment to race and social justice. As a large department, we recognize the need to scale up our efforts to embed race and social justice throughout the utility by cultivating ownership of RSJI among all our employees. We consider our employees to the catalysts in moving us forward into racial equity, and SPU is committed to supporting their efforts. Today, we'll share how the utility is advancing race and social justice by building knowledge and stewardship through the utility's branch equity teams and the benefit of increased change team membership. Several of my colleagues will expand on how the teams function. We prioritize the connection between our internal RSJI efforts and community-level impacts. For example, we have launched an initiative to examine ratepayer affordability with your support. Workforce equity is also our priority. For example, in 2017, we worked with the Seattle Youth Employment Program to host 15 interns, and in 2018, we'll increase that number to 28 interns. This program employs young people from communities that experience racial, social, and economic disparities and introduces them to a variety of utility careers. And developing strong, trusting relationships with our communities is essential to our approach, and Mattia will give you more information on this. But I want you to know that we are guiding our staff to prioritize community partnerships and community benefits in our long-range and more immediate planning efforts. I thank our staff who guide and implement this critical work, specifically our Race and Social Justice Initiative Change Team, our Environmental Justice and Service Equity Division, all our Branch Equity Change Team members. I also want to acknowledge all staff at Public Utilities for their engagement. And our aim is to define, prioritize, and model transformative practices and investments that advance race and social justice. And we look forward to great collaboration with Council, the Mayor's Office, the Office of Civil Rights, and the people of Seattle in this work. And so I'm now going to ask Natalie and Tracy to speak about Change Team Renewal.
Hi. So as of November 2017, our change team is finally fully staffed. It's been a long time. So we have 23 members representing all the lines of business out here. So up on the screen is our change team, our Seattle Public Utilities structure for doing our race and social justice work. So the green boxes on the bottom are all our branch equity teams. So as you see, it's across all lines of business. And so EJSC is managing the branch equity team effort. There's also the RSJI change team, which includes members from each branch equity team. And our executive sponsor is just the GM, Mami Hara, and Ken Snipes, our CAO. And there's a SPU executive branch equity team that's getting started or has started. And then we all report to our general manager, Mami. And we have still working relationships with SOCR that plays a real active role in helping us do our training and working through issues that may come up. So, and Kiana is our liaison from SOCR, so she's very involved in what we do.
So as it relates to the branch equity teams and the fact that you have an equity team for every branch, are there, I mean, I think of this as being quite an accomplishment because if you have, a branch is like a division, right? For the most part?
Branches roll up to, divisions roll up to branches?
Divisions roll up to branches, okay. So to have an equity team in every single branch really means that you're infusing the RSJI lens in all of the lines of business of SPO.
We want to make sure every corner of the utility is covered. And I think this is the best model, and this is how the change team gets to really know what's going on throughout the utility and what do we need to work on. Because we did find that there are similar issues that each branch equity team has brought up, like workforce equity or other things that we can do at the change team level instead of having like 8 different teams working on it. So it's an incredible model.
That's great.
Yeah.
And Natalie, I know you have been really the heart and soul of this work for a really long
Tracy,
time.
yeah. Me and Tracy, we're ready to like transition now. It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
Okay, so I just talked about the integrated structure. And to date, we actually have 11 fully staffed and active committees on the change team. I mean, they really dug into it, and I think all the preparation that we did, working together with the branch equity teams and the change team together, get all the training and the understanding about RSGI principles and stuff is really what helped us to just launch right into the work. And we got incredible executive sponsorship, and that's what you really have to make them work. Tracy?
Well, as Natalie mentioned, the change team reports directly to the executive sponsors, which we think creates a really superior sort of loop of accountability both ways. They also are on the change team, but we report to them as well. In late 2017, the change team members attended RSJI and ProSci change management training with branch equity teams. And this team is going to continue to build internal capacity and apply a racial equity toolkit to the 1996 graffiti nuisance ordinance this year.
So I'm Kathy Garcia. I'm the WIMBY manager for SPU, and I'm going to refer to the Women and Minority Business as WIMBY to make it easier for this process. At Seattle Public Utilities, we're committed to the inclusion of WIMBYs across all of our lines of business. And for 2017, we experienced wins, but also there's challenges. And from those challenges, we were able to learn and grow our strategies and our program. And also for 2017, our prompt payment was at 93%. We're striving for 95 for 2018, but also acknowledge that with the PeopleSoft implementation, there have been some challenges with our accounting system. So we're doing our best to keep up with those goals. In 2017, we did meet our purchasing goal of 12%, achieving 12% utilization for WIMBYs. In consulting, we achieved 21%, and of that 21%, 9% went to minority business enterprise, and 12% went to women business enterprise. And this next slide.
Before you move on,
Yeah.
can you speak to why it is that you measure prompt payment as part of measuring your achievement towards your WIMBY goals?
Sure. So the prompt payment asked us to pay within 30 days of receipt. And the reason why that's important is that a lot of these firms, especially WIMBY firms, may be smaller in size, and they are waiting for those payments in order to pay their subs or their employees. And if we take a long time to do that, then we're really making them float that expense. And so this helps in achieving that goal.
Yeah, I think that's a really brilliant example of how you're monitoring your own internal performance on a criteria that if you're not paying attention to it, actually results in failing to meet your WIMBY goals. I think that really is a good way to have an inside look at your own activities to see how sort of doing business as usual can actually interfere with our other policy desires and goals to make sure that we're giving business to women and minority enterprises. So that's very clever, I would say, to do that exercise for that purpose.
Thank you. And in this snapshot here, we have the breakdown of the WIMBY firms with regard to ethnicity. And so you can see that a large portion goes to white women-owned firms, followed by Asian, African American, and Hispanic and Native American firms. A lot of the utilization depends on what the availability is. And so we encourage, this only shows the priming, so who gets the contract, but there's a lot of work that we do with sub-consulting that isn't reflected right now. In the future, we hope to be able to reflect that. And there's a lot of work that preps that, good sub-consulting utilization so that they can later on prime. And so,
do you know, is that a citywide practice, the keeping track of timely payments?
Yeah, it is.
It is citywide, okay. Always looking for the stuff that you guys are doing that is smart to share with other departments, but that's good to know.
And so, so for 2018, we're looking at our inclusion strategies to continue what we've been doing for 2017 and also expanding on that. Part of the internal strategies are a WIMBY training that we were able to develop in-house, and we modeled it in a change management format, so making sure that you get buy-off and that people have the right tools and know how to use them. And so we divided it into 3 parts, WIMBY 101, 102, and 103. And we did our first pilot run earlier this year, and that went really well. We learned some things, and we're going to continue to do that throughout the utility to make sure that we're messaging and everybody's messaging in the same way. And another strategies are embedded in our procurement practices, making sure that we're not the barrier when procuring, making sure that the scope of the projects is open and equitable, and that when we're reviewing those that we have opportunity for all to apply. We're also participating with active meetings one-on-one with firms, both WIMBY and non-WIMBY, so that they understand what our goals are and how we want them to show up in team. Because we feel that if we're able to collaborate those relationships, it allows for better WIMBY results. And just continuing having our events. We have an annual A&E event that we host in February, and that was really successful this year. We had about 300 attendees, and we collaborate with other departments across the city and bring upcoming projects in the architect and engineering field and bring firms. And
what kind of event was that?
It's an architect and engineering forum, and so we gather all of the projects that we have upcoming for the next 2 years, and that way it gives them an opportunity to know what's happening at the utility so that they can plan and team accordingly, because that's one of the biggest barriers is not having enough time in advance to know what we're doing. And so if we can provide that to them, they've really liked that, and we bring in other parts of the city as well. And so that's our report for WIMBY.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna talk about the community partnership. to ensure all our Seattle Public Utility customers receive equitable access to our programs and services, our division, Environmental Justice and Service Equity, created and implemented the Community Partnership Program. Last year, we came and shared with you our pilot project. Our program aims to build sustainable partnership with organizations serving communities of color, immigrant, refugee, and low-income customers. In 2017, the Community Partnership Program completed its first request for qualification process and selected 3 community-based organizations for a 3-year partnership. Our partners include Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, Horn of Africa Services, and Chinese Information Service Center. In addition to these partners, we also have an open contract with the Department of Neighborhood's Community Liaison Programs. Our partners will help us with the planning, designing, and implementation of outreach and engagement strategies and activities to increase customers' knowledge and awareness on our lines of business priorities, programs, and services. Thanks to these partnerships, the utility has access to well-established communities and emerging populations. Our cohort of folks, we have about 30 staff from the community-based organization, along with, in that cohort, over 15 languages that we can tap into. During our 2016 to 2017 pilot, which was about 7 months, the Community Partnership Program reached over 1,500 customers. Our goal for this year is to onboard our partners through a robust series of training, and then engage our customers through tailored engagement activities that are culturally relevant and meet their needs. Our program is designed intentionally to provide a seat at the table for our partners so that the community is centered in all that we do. The utility staff interested in using this tool are required to work in tandem with our partners when designing their engagement activities so that their strategies can best fit the communities they represent. If you don't have any question, I'm going to turn this over to Steve Hamai, who will provide an overview of our work to further embed race and social justice into Seattle Public Utilities through the launch of our branch equity team model.
I do have one question.
Sure.
So the partnership is for 3 years.
Yes.
That seems like a long time.
Yes.
Do you have a sense of what's going to happen throughout those 3 years? It sounds a little bit like because you are engaged in the community in the partnership in the development of the curriculum, that you're sort of planning that curriculum as you go, but I imagine you must have some sort of a framework of where people are starting and where you're hoping your partner organizations end up with you after 3 years.
We have a 2-phase process. The phase 1 is onboarding. We know that the utilities work it's not visible readily like other services. So in phase 1, we do a mandatory training to onboard our community partners so that they have the shared language and understanding of what it is that we do. It's one of the stuff that we learned through our pilot project. It's like doing outreach and talking to people and not understanding what we do is really difficult. So we teach them SPOO language, and they in turn translate SPOO language into day-to-day languages where customers can understand it and connect to their day-to-day activities and their lived experience. So we are now heading into the second phase. Our second phase we're very intentional about positioning our community partners to be successful, both for the user, like the utility, and for them as they're implementing some of the activities. Mm-hmm. We do have in phase 2, there is a core services that they provide along with on-demand projects that the utility need community engagement and outreach for. So it's a very strategic method that we're using. So some of the core services that we offer through our program are educational workshops, surveys, and focus groups to help better understand our community priorities and what it is that they need. So all this data that we're collecting is to be able to inform in terms of how are we giving information and what else do we need to do, what are some of our gaps. So so not only just the core service annually that they will be doing for the next 3 years, we also have other lines of business who are tapping into our services.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So good morning. I really am here to really introduce you to 3 of our branch equity team members from 3 different branches. But Councilmember Herbold, I think you heard earlier a whole lot of enthusiasm and a description of our branch equity team efforts from Natalie and Mommy. We're about 1.5 years, almost 2 years into the launch and implementation of our branch equity teams. And so before I turn it over to our 3 branch equity team members, what I wanted to do was share some data with you about some of the efforts that we've gone through and some lessons learned. Most importantly, and I think Mommy and Natalie really spoke to this, is we recognize that the utility is very large and we're located in multiple buildings. And so we needed to develop a model that was really going to scale the efforts appropriately for the size of the organization. And as Natalie mentioned earlier, make sure that we're reaching every corner of the utility. Mm-hmm. And just in listening to Mattia, what really struck me is the community partnership model and efforts that as a utility that we're really engaged in. We're also doing sort of the same thing with our own internal staff. You know, our staff were not necessarily hired to be experts in race and social justice, so there's an effort to need to train them and to bring them up to speed so we can share the lexicon and language that we all commonly use as experts in race and social justice. So to that end, we focused on a lot of training in the first year and a half, and this is a little quick snapshot of what we were able to do. We provided over 1,400 hours of training to our over 80-plus branch equity team members. Some of these trainings, and I really do want to give a shout out to our partnership with Seattle Office for Civil Rights, who were responsible for providing some of these trainings, but some of these trainings were also provided in-house. As we have developed some curriculum that really speaks to the business of the utility as it relates to race and social justice. That 1,400 hours represents a fairly large chunk of time and commitment from all branch equity team and change team members. And so again, kudos to the leadership of the organization for really allowing our staff to spend time learning about these issues. We have a lot of great feedback from what they've learned about how to center the discussions around race and social justice as a branch equity team. And so as an outcome of this training, now we're really starting to see the embedding of the language as a more commonplace deep within every single branch. So the next slide is a really quick sort of capture. We were able to conduct a survey last July of all branch equity team members about their experience and what they were benefiting. And in addition to some 1 to 5 scaled questions, we also asked for some open-ended comments. And I just want to really point to 2 of the comments up here on the top sort of left on self-improvement, the comment of, my perspective is vastly altered from where it was 6 months ago. My own bias is easier to understand and acknowledge. And as a recommendation on the bottom right hand, continue efforts to shape the culture of the organization to help staff understand that race and social justice and service equity is everyone's responsibility and everyone can help make change happen. So this whole notion of individual growth and learning combined with a focus on the culture and decision making of the organization is where we're really leaning everyone into. And really as a sort of an effort going forward, we know that we are going to continue to branch out beyond just the branch equity team members to involve them specifically in toolkit application, WIMBY work, those kinds of efforts. And then finally, just wanted to share that in the survey, it was a lot of questions, but we really think there's, in casting a broad net, that we're really getting some more expert opinion on how we are doing as an organization in regards to race and social justice efforts. Those that are most engaged and most trained have sort of a higher level of expertise on our initiative, and really it creates a sort of a baseline of understanding of where we're at, and we can measure it on an annual basis going forward. So we do plan on surveying our own staff in these efforts on an annual basis. I just want to share one last slide with you really quickly. It's a little hard to read up here, but the question was, I have increased my commitment to learn and engage how to undo racism and inequity. And if you take a look at the 1 to 5 scores and you just look at strongly agree and 4 at 36%, in essence, what we really tried to do is bring some internal organizing into Seattle Public Utilities, and that what we really wanted to see was to make sure that we are engaging people appropriately. These folks know their lines of business better than we could ever know it. So they're the ones that really ultimately are the implementers, and they're the ones that can also identify the issues up front. So with that, I just wanted to give you a little bit of backdrop of where we're headed. We do have work plans. They are going to be working on racial equity tools. We're not really focused on that presentation today. We thought it was more important for us to share some of the stories of the actual branch equity team members with you. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Lee Moman from Solid Waste.
Great, thank you so
Good morning.
much.
Please excuse my reading my text. I just want to make sure I cover everything. So
No problem.
But
I read all the time, so.
all right. So I'm the co-lead for the Solid Waste Branch Equity Team, as well as the operations manager for the North Transfer Station. The makeup of the Solid Waste Branch Equity Team is unique, since its membership is mostly comprised of solid waste management and a few frontline employees. Our Deputy Director and Chief Administrative Officer, Ken Snipes, sent a powerful message when he chose the team to be leadership-heavy for the Branch Equity Team. He wanted us to have the framework to understand how institutional racism, power structures, and white privilege have created our current systems. As managers, we've gained a lens necessary to talk to our teams about how race may show up as an underlying driver when we encounter certain customers or even fellow SPU employees. In my position, I'm responsible for answering customer complaints. I've had this responsibility for over 20 years across the public and private sectors. While working and building the South Transfer Station, which is a racially and economically diverse neighborhood, we heard very few demands. In contrast to the North Transfer Station, which is a more affluent and less racially diverse community. Since reopening the North Transfer Station, we have seen a shift in our work environment and the content of the few complaints we do receive. I feel so blessed to have the honor to work with the North Transfer Station team, which is made up of almost 80% people of color and about 30% English as a second language speakers, which are now working under the gaze of a neighborhood with lots of privilege. As always, we continue to perform our jobs dutifully and with great pride. We make sure that every customer that walks through our door with a compliment or a complaint feels heard and respected. I'm also proud to say that we rarely get complaints due to the hardworking and customer-focused transfer station team. But I've had to work with my team to help them navigate what can often feel like hostile and distrustful interactions. As you see on the slide, a picture of our team there. This was just a recent from off-work activity that they get together. Through the race and social justice training I've received in my career and just day-to-day life as an African-American man, father of 2 college-stage students, husband, and now through the Solid Waste Branch Equity Team, I've been able to explain to our team how to avoid conflict due to some customers' biases and expectations from seeing primarily Black and brown bodies in one workspace. The discussions we have are very real and honest, and that deal with first perceptions of some of our guests. We have learned how to steer through and usually reshape some of those biases that a few customers might have of us as government employees, people of color, immigrants, and refugees. However, through some of their biases, it's easy to see how even the nicest of no from one of our team members could blow up. I've noticed a pattern in the language of otherness used in the complaints sent to our website, to Mommy, the mayor's office, and to our 24-hour hotline, which was required per our community agreement with the neighborhood. For example, last week I had to answer a letter that said an employee was mentally unstable, unable to speak English, and if she could not speak good English, she should not be able to work. This customer cussed at our attendant and then took a picture of her to send in with her complaint. Now, we understand that a visit to the transfer station, also known as the dump, might not be sometimes someone's favorite chore, and that if we're not able to accept an item, it might cause frustration. However, to ensure our safety and to protect our environment, we cannot bend the rules. Our always professional staff is now instructed to reach out to management whenever dealing with difficult customers. So I wanted to share these stories to highlight the strategies and knowledge I've gained through my branch equity team participation. I also wanted to speak directly to you on behalf of the North and the mighty, mighty South Transfer Station teams. So when you hear from your constituents, whether good or bad, please consider the conditions we're faced with daily. I also want to invite you or any other council members to the North Transfer Station. It's a beautiful facility. And for that, that's the end of my time, unless there's questions.
Thank you. I'm a visitor to the South transfer station, it being right down the hill from where I live and very, very convenient for those trips to the dump. Appreciate the work that y'all do. Please send my thanks to all those folks that are helping us keep our homes and yards clean.
Will do, thank you. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Richard Fernandez, who will share his perspective as the co-lead of the Project Delivery Branch Equity Team.
Thank you, Lee. Lee shared, a very personal story and real story, and that the experience with their customers. I'll try my best to show an equally powerful, maybe an equitably powerful moment working in the Project Delivery Branch at SPU. Prior to SPU launching the branch equity teams, I was very interested in race and social justice topically. I was familiar with the concept of equity previously in the context really of education only. That was one area that I was really interested in it. But like many engineers, I didn't think that equity principles really applied to civil engineering. In my mind, locations and design of infrastructure was determined by the system, right? The engineered system, not by engineers trying to further marginalize already oppressed groups. Then I joined the branch equity team. We did a lot of training in the early part of our time together. We learned about race in the different forms that it takes, racism in the different forms that it takes, including structural, institutional, and individual racism. Through this process, we're now able, as a team, we're now able to identify racial and social disparities in our actual work, something that's been mentioned a couple of times now with the branch equity team model, versus conceptually, right? Especially in the context of how we may contribute to institutional racism. A few key areas that we've worked on include WIMBY inclusion and how we approach WIMBY firms, both as prime consultants and sub-consultants on our contracts. We've been working really closely with Katya on that. We've looked at impacts from SPU construction, especially in the context of community benefits and harm from our projects. Universally, this is understood to be different based on the location in our city. And then we've also taken a look at our internal team dynamics, so respect and providing space when that's needed. In working through these issues, the team has demonstrated our strength. We've been engaged, and most importantly, we've gained a skill set to continue our work in RSJ. We understand individuals at the city in general are not racist, but we all acknowledge the unintended effects of institutional racism, which is what we try to focus on. Through training, communications, and focused efforts on WIMBY inclusion and equity in construction impacts, I feel we're making positive change in the organization, and I hope that there's ripple effects in the greater engineering and Seattle communities, and I would even further that to the national stage as well. I think we're leading this work. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Deb Hayden, who's a member of the Drainage and Wastewater Branch Equity Team and is also a representative of her team to the Race and Social Justice Change Team.
Thanks. As he said, I'm a member of the Branch Equity Team for Drainage and Wastewater, which, like Lee's group, is a mixture of field and professional staff. The makeup of our team comes from across the branch, and this allows our members the opportunity to learn and network with coworkers that they would normally not encounter in their day-to-day work. We can approach and bring light to race and social justice issues within the branch, but particularly for those with fields or from the field. Historically, their issues have remained isolated to the respective business area, and through their participation in the branch equity team, they are able to amplify their concerns on a wider platform, making it harder for them to remain unaddressed. Our branch equity team will also use the SPU Racial Equity Toolkit to review important programs with problematic service equity outcomes. With a broader focus on stakeholders and systems management, we hope to take on their challenges. As a representative of my branch equity team in the Change Team, I am able to share our findings as a BET to inform how to best change policies utility-wide. These policies will not only improve working conditions for staff, but will improve how we provide service to our customers. As an example of how issues raised by our branch equity team influence the work of the change team is a recent incident where inappropriate material was used in a presentation and the incident was reported. As part of the discipline, our executive sponsor chose to use this offense as an opportunity to start dialogue on impacts to staff and why it is important to recognize and listen to those impacted. How others can become allies and be empowered to speak up and address inappropriate behavior, as well as the opportunity to meet, engage, and learn from our EJSE staff resources and much more. Next steps will look at how these learning opportunities can be implemented fairly across the utility.
Thank you.
So I now turn it over to Mommy for some concluding statements.
Before we move over to that, Lee, the comments you were sharing about frontline staff who are engaging with the public and yourself as well, when there is inappropriate material that's shared or there's an inappropriate engagement with a member of if the member of the public is engaging inappropriately with frontline staff in a way that is racist or transphobic or some other way that is in conflict with our values, how do we handle that? And I think about how so many businesses and particularly bars take the practice of visibly stating that their establishments don't have tolerance for racist or transphobic behavior. I'm wondering if there is a way that we can set the tone for what we expect from the public in a way that does not put the burden to do that on people of color working for the city. If there's a way that we can do it so that those expectations are expressed before there is, an inappropriate exchange at the dump because somebody's ticked off because you don't take something that they want to dump off.
That's a really interesting and meaningful thought, and we would love to work with you on that.
No easy answers.
There are no easy answers. As a service organization with many, many touch points with different kinds of customers, we typically always just do our best to be as accommodating and service-oriented as possible without, pushing forward those kinds of issues. And, but we would love to work with you on that.
Thank you.
So, as you can see, the work of our staff and their initiative is incredible. I'm perpetually impressed by everything that these folks and all of the people that they're working with within the utility and our partners outside the utility. But there's still a lot of work to do. And a lot of that work that needs to happen is at the uppermost levels of the department. So I've challenged the executive team of the department, myself included, and the leadership team, which includes all of the directors and high-level managers of the department, to really take ownership of race and social justice issues and to create tangible differences in both our internal working environment and also in the services that we provide. And some of the key areas that we'd like them to focus on this year is to support, of course, our change teams and our branch equity teams, and to focus on contracting equity and our ability to both analyze and help women and minority business enterprise in both subprime and prime contracting opportunities to improve our community partnerships, because these kinds of schemes only work well the more people who are invested and assisting, and also to really make sure that we are truly looking at our work environments to make sure that we eliminate bias in our approaches internally. So I want to thank all of these employees. They're incredible, and also everybody else who are collectively working to eliminate institutional racism at Seattle Public Utilities. So that's the end of our formal briefing, but we would be happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic. Well, I appreciated you allowing me to interject questions as we went, because I would never remember them if I held them to the end. Thank you for all of the work that you guys are doing. Thank you for being a beacon for the rest of the city, and the leadership that the folks who are leaders are playing, as well as all the participation all the way through the organization. It's really making the difference, and like I said, I think you're really helping bring the rest of the city along. So thank you.
Thank you.
The third and final item on today's agenda is a nature scorecard presentation.
Yeah,
Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us. Start off with some introductions, please.
Yes, my name is Danielle Shaw. I'm with the Washington Environmental Council.
And I'm Sophia Ressler, and I'm with Puget Soundkeeper.
I'm Pam Emerson with Seattle Public Utilities.
Fantastic. Thank you all for joining us. Who's going to kick us off?
I will. And first, thank you for the time and space to present on Nature Scorecard. This is a project between Puget Soundkeeper and Washington Environmental Council. As a quick preview, we are here to offer our congratulations and praise for the City of Seattle in being awarded one of our 8 Green Stars. This is for your recognition for your leadership in adopting low-impact development principles and protocols in your municipal code, which was pursuant to a stormwater permit. So thank you to the council for supporting this work. We know that a lot of this work came through council, but also a big thank you to the staff, especially Seattle Public Utilities and Pam Emerson. They really did the heavy lifting on a lot of this work and deserve a lot of praise. It took years.
And just as a quick recap, stormwater from all of the cities and counties in Washington is regulated by a permit under the authority of the Clean Water Act, and the purpose of that permit is to prevent pollution from entering our waterways. The journey to get low-impact development in this permit was a long one. Puget Soundkeeper and People for Puget Sound about 10 years ago started the work to get this low-impact development requirement into the municipal stormwater permit. And in 2012, Ecology finally came out with a permit that requires municipalities to implement low-impact development for new and redevelopment. So the critical language in the permit that we really latched onto for this project was that cities and counties were required to make new and redevelopment the low-impact development for new and redevelopment the common and preferred approach to development.
So this low-impact development code update was one small piece of a very big permit, but we felt it was one of the most critical steps to achieving a healthy future for your community and providing for a clean Puget Sound. The codes are sort of the baseline. They're where we get progress from. As a reminder, because we have an opportunity in public forum, low-impact development is an alternative to sending stormwater directly to our waters through pipes and drains. It incorporates natural drainage solutions into development. It helps collect and filter that through natural solutions to protect people from pollution and flooding.
Can you just speak a little bit to what does it look like for, on the ground for SPU to have this requirement as part of the stormwater permitting process? And what does it mean with your engagement with developers and what they have to do differently?
Mm-hmm. Sure, I'm happy to answer that. Yeah. So for SPU, we worked across the city. We're the holders of the permit, but we engaged many partners across the city. I want to give a shout out particularly to SDOT, to then DPD, now SDCI. So we looked at land use code, we looked at the right-of-way improvement manual, we looked at stormwater code, we looked at Title 15, how we use the right-of-way. We looked at our park standards, we looked at fire code, we looked at a host of design standards, we looked at standard plans and specs. Just it was a pretty involved process with touching a lot of people in a lot of departments. Some concrete changes that we made, I'll just touch on 3 different places where we made changes. We made changes in land use code. So examples there. So that's not SPU's code per se, but we're a partner on that code. We made a change to allow above ground cisterns and other green infrastructure in what previously had been defined as setback areas, because we had gotten feedback from the development community that was a barrier to including on-site stormwater management, especially in denser areas. We clarified that bioretention could be used for screening parking lots. So that's a landscaping requirement that's in land use code, but we're making it clear to developers that they can use one solution that kind of counts for 2 things. So those are examples from land use code. On the transportation side, we integrated what had previously been guidance for green infrastructure inclusion in the right-of-way, moved over to the required section of the right-of-way improvement manual, the document that directs the development community what they can and can't do in the right-of-way. We also crafted guidance around how to harmonize or optimize bioretention, green stormwater infrastructure with street trees in the right-of-way. So that was a sort of unexpected area of conflict and sort of a design conflict, and we wanted to make clear that it's not an either or, that's a both and provided pretty clear design guidance to the design community about how to approach that in the right-of-way. In our stormwater code, that's the code we own, we lowered some thresholds. So we, again, via conversations with both the development community and our land use experts, we're learning that, and permit reviewers learning that there's a lot of subplatting going on, in urban villages mostly, and that was being used as a strategy to dip in just under the threshold that required drainage review and that triggered our requirements, particularly for on-site management. And so we lowered that threshold to kind of close that loophole and catch that aggregate impact of those small projects. We lowered another threshold as well, but that gives you a taste of the types of changes that we made. Sure.
And we'll definitely get into a few more examples that we really appreciated from Seattle's code. The culmination of WC and Soundkeeper's work is what we're calling Nature's Scorecard. We did a high-level review of all 81 Puget Sound municipalities and their compliance with the low-impact development requirement of the municipal stormwater permit. This was a project that we hoped would provide opportunities for grassroots as well as a celebration of progress. Some of the ways that we presented this within the scorecard was this pie chart, which showed color-coded levels of effort. We also did a checklist for all of the municipalities that Danielle will kind of get into the details of in just a minute. And we did maps. We were looking for a lot of different things from municipalities, as Pam kind of just went over. This had many, many components to it. So some of the things that we specifically looked at were transparency to both the public and to political leaders, timeliness of the process, whether there was chance for public engagement, of course, meaningful and pertinent code revisions, as well as that comprehensive document review that Pam went over with you. So what we found out on a high level was that 50% of Puget Sound municipalities kind of didn't make the meaningful code revisions that we were looking for. We did, however, have 8 municipalities, including Seattle, that we thought did really amazing job and were leaders in this work, as well as examples for the rest of the municipalities that didn't quite meet the requirements.
So Nature Scorecard was not only an attempt to do some tracking of a regulation we felt very passionately about, it was also our attempt to turn something wonky into something accessible for your community as well. We did this, and this is just a snapshot up on this slide of some elements to try and turn something that for each of the 81 municipalities can look a variety of ways and can amount to hundreds of different types of code updates. So how do you tell a community what that meant? We use maps, we use the voice of some community members, we use high-level metrics, because the power of our organizations to support progress is not just me and Sophia reading codes for hours on end, it's us translating that work to our members and our community and having them have a tool to either congratulate the City of Seattle for incredible work or let their communities know that they feel like they're behind and that they're harming the health of their community by being behind. And one way to make that as the most concrete as possible was we found 5 specific code updates we were looking for. We felt like these were code updates that a community could see the impact of. And to make it as objective as possible, we relied on the annual reports of the municipality as well as the code itself to find these, not in external communications, but looking within the code. We relied on an ecology-created resource to define what were those 5 ones. So these were all ones highlighted in an ecology resource on good behavior, good changes. And then we translated those into language that the community can understand. So we have 5, softening our footprint. What we meant by that was in your code, you have maximum impervious surface limits. You're not just paving over your plot, because that takes away the ecological systems that really support a healthy environment. For building with care, that was during your most vulnerable time for your land, do you protect it during construction zone? So do you control when it is, not during a wet season? Do you protect the native vegetation around? Improving filtration, are you supporting the use of permeable pavements? This is a technology that's been proven, especially for sidewalks and parking lots, to be very effective. Growing the right trees, a simple one, but do you in your code tell your community what are the right trees for your community? That's the best place for them to access, the community and the developers. Do you explicitly call out what's a native tree, what's a good local tree, what works well? And last one, maintaining buffers. This is all about critical area buffers. Do you explicitly explain that's a native vegetation area? And if it's not already, it needs to be rehabilitated with native vegetation, because that's supporting a healthy ecosystem through the streams as well. So those were the 5 checklists. We did the check marks for each on, and we created little videos to show how they worked in the real world, and the language that explains on a different level what that means in a code update.
And the City of Seattle did a wonderful job with these check marks, got 5 out of 5. And Pam, I think, already covered some of the great updates that were made. And we just wanted to touch base on a few other examples from the code that explicitly relate to these check marks. So for softening our footprint, the City of Seattle has max lot coverage for an incredibly wide range of zoning areas: residential, single family, commercial, residential, small lot, as well as shoreline.
For building with care, this was my favorite language I found out of all 81s. It said sediment controls were constructed first and shall remain functional for as long as activities take place. That all best management practices avoid interference with juvenile salmonids. I never saw that language anywhere else. That you're retaining duff layer, topsoil, native vegetation on each side to the extent practical, and you have seasonal limits. That scope and that level of detail was unique and something to be very proud of.
Can you talk a little bit about the seasonal limits?
So you don't want to, as much as you can, and I'll let Pam could do construction site during seasonal, because when it rains, that's when the soils become less stable. That's when you can have the sliding and the impacts. So you try, and this is explicitly in your code, it says from October 1st to April 30th, no soils shall remain exposed or unworked for more than 2 days.
I see. So it's not that the construction is being limited during those times, it's just that there are particular requirements for construction.
Exactly.
And that by keeping it worked, you're somehow minimizing the damage that could occur by doing construction at times where it's wet weather.
Exactly. You're recognizing that there's natural processes at place while you're doing construction processes.
One of the questions I get a lot, and we don't have anybody from SDCI here, so I don't expect an answer, but one of the questions I get a lot is from members of the public is they know that there's an environmentally critical area, and they see that there's development happening in that environmentally critical area. And what I try to explain is that our environmentally critical designations is not intended to say that no development can occur in those areas, but that there's a higher standard that must be met. Is that an area that you looked at all?
Yeah, so I can skip right to that. One of the areas that we looked at was buffers, and making sure that those buffers were maintained, and buffers are a really great way to protect critical areas. Seattle in their buffer language requires that degraded buffers have to be restored. They have to do that by removing impervious surface and existing non-native vegetation, to replant with native trees, native vegetation, and then provide a 5-year monitoring and maintenance plan. And Seattle is the only place that we saw language that strong, and definitely the only place that we saw that monitoring plan requirement.
I imagine the monitoring would be pretty important.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Then the last one that we haven't touched on yet was improving filtration, and that's where we were looking for permeable surfaces, and specifically in the city of Seattle, driveways that provide access from the street are required to be paved with permeable, as well as alleys, and then also the potential for roadways, depending on if that's feasible or not.
And there was one more for growing without trees. You had a street tree list and a master tree list, and you articulated exactly which ones were native. That was as comprehensive as we could get, and a great example for other cities.
So because of those check marks, as well as the process that Seattle went through and the things that Pam has already touched on, Seattle received one of our Green Star designations, and we are really excited to be here to tell you that and to present that. And some of the factors that went into that, that other than the ones that I've already talked about, were just your leadership in this area, the holistic, transparent process that you went through, demonstrating that even when you're really ahead of the game in development code, there's still really great work that can be done. So thank you again to the council for supporting this work. Thank you so much to the staff for undertaking this. It was a big lift. So thanks and great job.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'll just add, sorry.
I was gonna thank you for doing the work that is responsible for incentivizing communities to demand more of their government. Thanks to SPU and the other departments that were a part of this. I'd be interested to know that, because you're gauging the successes of communities throughout the state, if there are areas, and we don't have to talk about it now, but if there are areas where we could do better, particularly if there are instances where we are adopting a model or a policy or a permitting process that relies on incentivization when perhaps we should make those things a requirement. As we move through the mandatory housing affordability legislation that is upzoning much of our city, that I think this is a good opportunity to also put into place better standards for low-impact development as well.
And I just want to add, because it's a great anecdote of your leadership, this permit requirement was phased in, so Seattle had to do this before most. And Pam was supportive of others in the phase 2 getting it done right by providing insight on a webinar to those. And I thought she set the right tone for making it feel accomplishable. It was a very overwhelming task for smaller towns with much small staff, but giving examples of how to get it done right was great. So again, just to emphasize, it's not only about celebrating some wonkiness that we got to dive through in particular, it's about translating this accomplishment and celebrating success, because I don't know that we do that enough. What we've done is we've done these presentations for each of the Green Stars. We've presented at conferences. We're going to host a video workshop on using Facebook Live to teach community members how to use this tool, because we have templates for letters and testimony to public at public meetings that they can take to their city councils to say, hey, really glad you did this, or hey, you could do this better. We're trying to make this not only a celebration, but also a moment for community to feel an ability to take action. So again, thank you. We're just so excited to be here. We do have a physical award we would love to give Mommy, but we would love to show you, and if it's appropriate, we could take a photo at the end of this.
Sure.
And we just appreciate the time. This is really great work.
Absolutely love having you. For my colleagues who weren't able to join me today, I'll definitely be sharing the materials, and just know that you have a viewing audience as well.
Thank you.
And please feel free, our emails are on our materials, so please feel free to reach out to us with any questions.
Great. Thank you. All right. With that, it's 11:11, and I am adjourning the meeting.